A standalone PS2 emulator in the Xbox? Sign me up. But I bet you have some questions, huh? How do you get it to work? How does it compare with the PS2 core in RetroArch? How's the emulation and gameplay quality? Does it suck? To answer that last question, no. But we'll take a look at the standalone PS2 emulator for the Xbox Series X and S to answer the others. We're talking all about AetherSX2 on the Xbox, baby. Stay tuned. Greetings, my name is Efrain, and I like playing games on the Xbox and telling you about those games in a video. Thanks for tuning in. And well, it's about time I jump back into the white lab coat and cover emulation on the Xbox again. Because there's some great things happening, specifically when it comes to PS2 emulation. Due to AetherSX2, a program used to emulate Sony's 6th generation console contender, being available via UWP download. Meaning a standalone dev mode PS2 emulator is available on Xbox consoles, and it's great. And because I'm me, I want to cover this in detail, even though I'm very late to the party on this one. I specifically wanted to see how this standalone version compares with the PC XS2 core in RetroArch. I got to play twice the amount of Jak and Daxter. Hell yeah. But not only that game, I did some pretty extensive testing on a variety of games. Classics, shooters, racing, fighting, console intensive, small and large. I also wanted to compare AetherSX2's ease of use to RetroArch, setup and UI wise. Yeah, it's easier for me to say AetherSX2, so expect to hear that more throughout the video. Not trying to be funny, it's just easier on my mouth. I think I once mentioned the PlayStation 2 is one of my favorite consoles, so I was thrilled when I got the opportunity to play these games on my favorite current gen system. It was pretty lackluster several months ago, but I could see we were almost there. Now several advancements later, we're going to see if we finally have arrived at good PS2 emulation on the Xbox family. Let's get into it, shall we? Okay, so first off, let's briefly cover the setup process, as I'm sure many of you will want to do this as well. I'll be showing everything in dev mode just because I like keeping emulation stuff separate from retail Xbox mode, and also I paid for the dev feature, I'm using all the goddamn dev feature. There is no official AetherSX2 retail download, but there are always ways to get it on retail mode. Just make sure you are not paying for the program. Stop! That completely goes against the developer's wishes. Like I said before, I'm going to run through setup quickly so we can get to the comparison and quality review of this video. So buckle your fuckle, kiddos. Let's begin with what you'll need on the hardware and device side. Obviously, an Xbox Series X or S, a computer with access to the internet. I've heard that you can use your phone for setup, it's just far easier on a computer. But if you have to and know how to, use your phone. And finally, you might want to get a USB flash drive or external hard drive. You certainly don't need it, but I highly recommend using one. You can run games, BIOS, and saves all off the USB drive, so it saves space on the Xbox's internal SSD. On the software side, you'll need an active dev account, the dev mode activation app on your Xbox, BIOS files, PS2 games, and the AetherSX2 UWP package. An optional piece of software I recommend having in general is Durango FTP, not really needed for setup, but it is a very handy program. I'll also throw the Durango UWP website download in the description for those of you who need it. Pro tip, change Durango FTP into a game if you're running it in dev mode, or you'll lose your mind over why all your directories are empty. Now open an internet browser and head over to the AetherSX2 download page. Link will be in the description below. The Aether folks have put up important information regarding the UWP programs you should definitely read and keep in mind throughout setup and use. The most important notes are at the top describing which type of download you'll need for your specific type of box. For our purposes, it's the AetherSX2 version for the Series X and S. There's also a written setup guide here that's very well put together and easy to follow for those of you who are familiar with this process. Now scroll down to the bottom of the page for all the downloads. Like I said, we want the AetherSX2 version, specifically the most recent build indicated by the most recent date on the right of the download. Get that file downloaded, no need for unzips or any additional processes, just have it saved on a computer someplace easy to find. If you haven't already, switch over to developer mode on your console, then access your Xbox via web browser on your device of choice. Simply type the IP address you get on the home screen of dev mode into the address bar exactly as is displayed. Get past any security protocols in place, type in your username and password, and bam, you're in. Once in the portal page, click the green add button at the top left of the screen. Simply add the Aether UWP package and that's it. There are no other dependencies or additional files to install. Congrats, you now have a sweet PS2 emulator on your Xbox. Now let's talk USB flash drive. You can install games on the Xbox's SSD, but in order to save space for retail side games, I recommend using an external drive. Loading is only slightly slower anyway. Make at least 2 folders on your drive, one for housing PlayStation 2 BIOS files and another for games. I cannot nor will I provide BIOS files as it's against some stupid copyright shit, but many places online give the finger to the copyright police and provide them for free. Google them up and download carefully, my fellow copyright fighters. Same with games. Google them bad boys and download carefully, hopefully from a well-respected ROM site. Vimslayer. There's another step I use to make things load faster off a USB I won't get into because I can't explain it concisely, but this website does. So feel free to undertake this process if desired. Link in the description. It's not a substantial speed boost, so it's not necessary, and I don't know why I'm talking about this. I said it's gonna be fast. Efrain, come the fuck on! Now that you have your USB set, take that bad boy out of your PC and plug it into your Xbox. The final steps for setup are all in the Xbox, so let's switch over there. Hey! You might get an Xbox notification to reformat your USB drive to accommodate Xbox games. Don't do that. It'll erase all the stuff you have saved on there. Leave it as general media storage. Now highlight the AetherSX2 program. Hit the select button on your controller, go to properties and change it from an app to a game. Then launch it. If you've ever downloaded DuckStation on the Xbox, the UI should look very familiar. If not, it's all very easy to navigate and all clearly labeled. First things first, go over to the BIOS settings, this icon here. Change the directory where the app accesses BIOS files to the USB drive labeled E drive and navigate to the BIOS folder you made and choose Use this directory. You don't do this step, you don't get to play PS2, it's as simple as that. Then go over to Games directory, add search directory, back out until you get to the E drive, find your PS2 games folder and use this directory. Final thing to set up is your hotkeys, specifically 1. Navigate over to the hotkeys menu, the second to last icon on the right, simply bind 1 or 2 buttons to toggle the emulator quick menu. I chose to use the start select combo. You can restart your console to solidify these changes, but that's not necessary. After your program's all set, go ahead and start playing your favorite games. And that's the setup. Setup is much easier and faster than RetroArch, with a much simpler UI that I don't think anyone will be dissatisfied with. Honestly, the hardest part in all of this was sticking the USB drive into the Xbox's back port. Damn it. Making a games list on Aether is much easier and faster. Okay, there's a couple extra steps in RetroArch using a manual scan that'll cost you a couple of seconds and is already easy to use, so Aether isn't that much faster. But God forbid you try to do a quick scan on RetroArch. Most times it'll take forever, or crash the app if you try to abort the scan. In Aether, just tell it where your games are and you're basically done. I know I covered setup quite quickly, but chances are that people who are watching this already know how to do this, so I left out some information. Like if you need to install another BIOS or more games, you should use an FTP program to add in files without unplugging your USB flash drive. If you like a very informative and well-constructed setup guide, I strongly recommend Arcade Games' video, link in the down there part if you need it. But the details and specific instructions aren't super necessary for this emulator, which is part of the reason why I love it. Purely simpler, faster, and better than its competitors. And while we're at it, better in terms of quality. Let's talk about that. I got to play a hell of a lot of games for this video, on both RetroArch and Aether. So many that I had to conscript the testing of some of these games to my buddy.
Hey Lewis, thanks for helping out. You having a good time?
Efrain, shut the fuck up.
Popular titles, hardware demanding games for the time, small games, big games, and games that nobody even asked for. Please don't judge me. This video will be an hour long if I try to compare every game I played or talked about how good they feel or don't. And I know people on this website like really long videos, but I'm the one who has to fucking make them, and I don't have the tenacity or endurance for that. What do I look like, a YouTube video essayist? I'm barely a YouTuber. No, instead I'll keep my list relatively short and only talk about the games that were notably changed on AetherSX2. If you're wondering about a specific game not seen in this video, I probably didn't test it or didn't make the cut for the video. Some of them, like Metal Gear Solid 3, only fixed some FPS drops and cutscenes.
Fly, God be with you.
But gameplay was virtually the same in both applications, so I didn't bother talking about it here. Now I should also preface this by also disclosing my testing methods. I did not complete any of these games, I only played the first level-ish of each of them, with the exception of one, mainly due to bias, and things get kinda weird at later levels. I figured a good 30 to 45 minute playtest is a decent barometer for the rest of the game. Chances are, if there are any errors at the start of the game, they'll either be present or get worse in later levels. One more thing, all tests were performed on the default base level application. No modifications to rendering, aspect ratio, or resolution, just standard PS2 emulation. Changes to aspect ratio, resolution, and any other modifications I'll talk about later in the video in AetherSX2 only. Aether also has a screen tearing issue due to VSync not automatically being enabled by default. I didn't want to touch it due to the fact that it might affect games and screw up our comparisons. Well, it doesn't really, and I just turned that sucker on about halfway through tests. So the screen tearing won't be taken into consideration when comparing it to RetroArch. Okay, that's enough explaining my testing basis, now on to the comparisons, starting with a little game called Need for Speed Most Wanted. Most Wanted and the rest of the Need for Speed franchise are games asked about on my and other people's channels. Last I heard, the games were pretty rough on RetroArch, and on the current version of RetroArch I can confirm it's a big ol' bowl of rufferoni and broken dreams. As soon as you get to the main menu, the game gets incredibly choppy. FPS drops significantly and audio glitches out. There was a small amount of lag when just trying to navigate the menu. Once you get into an actual race, the problems persist and compound heavily in some areas and instances. Instead of a fluid, fast, and euphoric experience that you expect from a racing game, it's the equivalent to jamming needles underneath your fingernails. There were brief moments when the game would be normal and smooth, but it would immediately go back to a barely playable state. Overall, it's a choppy, laggy mess that I could only stomach one race. AetherSX2 on the other hand offered almost perfect emulation. The game is essentially playable, no lag in menus, smooth racing gameplay, and audio is crystal clear. I say almost perfect because of course there may be some hiccups in the story mode or in later races, but in my brief 30-minute playtest I experienced not a single issue and honestly had a lot of fun. I can confidently say that AetherSX2 is the best way to play Most Wanted on the Xbox, and I'm willing to bet all Need for Speed games as well. Other racing or car games had the opposite behavior, although the errors encountered were very, very minor. Gran Turismo 4, a graphical and technologically impressive game for the time, ran incredibly smooth on RetroArch, which is surprising because fucking look at it. On Aether, the only issue was with the car textures. The shine and shadow simply weren't functioning normally. Other than that, the game runs beautifully, and that very minor error can be remedied by simply changing the renderer from the default hardware setting to software, a setting we'll talk about later. Doing so does not affect the performance or quality for the most part. You'll get some FPS drops on the night tracks and as well as some others, but runs pretty well just on software mode. Let's move over to some popular PS2 titles in the 3D adventure platformer genre, starting with the most substantial improvement. Sly Furry and the Thievius Raccoonus is a horrendous nightmare on RetroArch. Gameplay is unbelievably choppy in almost all instances. Because of this, the game is much slower, which also contributes to the feeling of input delay. The game is certainly playable if you have no other option and you really like to suffer. But thankfully, there is another option. I'm happy to say Sly Cooper on AetherSX2 runs beautifully. Gameplay is smooth and clean, and controls are more responsive as a result. I haven't played this game in a long time, but AetherSX2 definitely feels just as good as I remember on the PS2. Now onto my favorite, Jak and Daxter. And I'll say it right now, both emulators have the shadow glitch, just the way the game was developed or coded or something, I don't know, this game's weird. On RetroArch the game will stutter and lag in some areas or instances, which is most noticeable in the second level area, the Precursor Basin. In this location the game will chug along at a slower pace, frame rates dip, and the speed of the game is affected consequentially.
I've said it before, I'll say it again!
In Aether, this area is far smoother. Yes, there are very minor dips in quality still, but far less severe. This area or level is kinda rough on emulators, and I don't know why, but that doesn't change the fact that the game is still best played on AetherSX2. Outside of this area, I encountered no errors or issues and generally had a blast playing this game at a constant frame rate. Fingers crossed for the PC port to mosey on over to the Xbox for a better, truer, buttery smooth experience. These effects also go for Jack 2, which was rough in RA, especially in cutscenes. But on the later emulator, ran smoothly and had almost no faults in my experience.
What?
Shadow of the Colossus is a great game. It has compelling visuals, a simple yet beautiful story, and stellar music to tie these things together. RetroArch ruins this game. You'll experience choppy cutscenes and gameplay, which also affects audio, causing numerous times where the music will clip and also cause me great displeasure. Hey, you guessed it, the game performs better on Aether, offering a smoother experience. However, it does this weird thing where it fluctuates between 60 FPS and 30 FPS in gameplay with no in between, even after applying the VSync fix. Pretty sure most people won't care as they're probably not going to play this game with a frame counter on, so I don't think it's really worth worrying about, and the game's still great. This next game is easily the most improved on AetherSX2 because I had the most bizarre experiences on RetroArch. Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, a certified fucking banger no matter who you are, had a very severe visual glitch right before getting into the actual game. On top of that, cutscenes were very rough.
Your travels, but mesmerized at the sight of Baldur's Gate.
And when you could actually play, the game would slow to an unbelievable crawl in the first level hub location. Getting into an area with combat was better, but I was met with more lag on more than one occasion. AetherSX2 cleans the game up to a playable state. You'll still get a bit of FPS drop in the previous mentioned locations, but it's still substantially improved on this emulator. God of War and GTA San Andreas I'm going to lump together because they had similar interesting issues in RA. They had this weird double exposure effect in cutscenes and a little in gameplay. It's a glitch I've never seen in games, emulated or not. God of Wars might be downright dangerous to people with epilepsy or similar photosensitive medical conditions. While we're at it, Baldur's Gate if you're not prepared. So I'm happy to say Aether fixes these issues, has no problems in gameplay, and makes these games playable again to everybody on Xbox. It's not all rainbows and sunshine on Aether though. The one game that I didn't like on AetherSX2 was Killzone. Admittedly, it was a little smoother on AetherSX2 than it was on RetroArch. RetroArch had the same issues as most games. It stuttered and slowed down in certain areas or situations, yada yada yada, you've heard it before. Aether, however, had these weird moments where the game would stutter and freeze up for a couple of frames. It was very disorienting and really annoying and kind of came out of nowhere. There was also this glitch where you'd get like 1 or 2 black frames right before you threw a grenade, which, yeah, irritating, but I thought it was funny. I just imagine your character getting scared and blinking right before you toss your grenade. I thought maybe running this game via software renderer would help. Nope, made it worse. Not only did it not alleviate any of the initial problems, performance was crappier in general. It stuttered and slowed down in areas you'd expect. And even in areas you didn't expect. There were very brief moments of smooth quality gameplay in all my testing, which is a downright shame. Sad to say, but I'm going to have to. Killzone isn't great on the Xbox right now, and I can't recommend playing it on either program. And that about does it for the RetroArch Aether Games battle. Out of the 20 games I playtested, only one I'd say performed worse on Aether, while the other titles worked phenomenal on the emulator. And just because I have nowhere to put this fact, switching games is also better on AetherSX2. A lot of the times, I wanted to immediately switch over to another game after finishing up one. On RetroArch, I was met with a black screen, forcing me to close down the app and relaunch it. It sucked. Adds way more time to the process than necessary. AetherSX2, you just quit the game you're in and launch the next one with very little startup time, and it even allows you to make a save state right before you quit if you desire. To conclude this section, AetherSX2 is an incredible emulator and a damn good way to play PS2 classics on a modern console. With emulation, you get to own your games and preserve the titles you want, and a lot of times feels as good as you remember. Sure, emulators might not get every aspect of the game right, but they make some titles playable. Titles that are either lost to time, indefinitely on the company's back shelf, or games that will never be remastered or re-released for this generation of console, at the settings and quality you want, and at which your device can handle. And let me tell you, Aether on the Xbox Series consoles can handle quite a lot. Let's finish this video off by talking about pushing this emulator to its limits. AetherSX2 has a lot of settings. We are going to be talking about some of them. Going to be honest, I've been staring at this part of the script for days. It's been completely blank because I couldn't figure out how to start this section. And this is the best I came up with. Let's start off by modernizing these games by fitting them to whatever screen you may be working with. AetherSX2 offers widescreen patches to essentially put most games in a 16:9 aspect ratio, filling most modern game screens. It's a nice little toggle feature that doesn't require a constant restart like RetroArch. Flip that sucker on and you'll very quickly find out if your game supports widescreen on this emulator. All the games I tested and then some were fine with widescreen enabled. As a matter of fact, I think it'd be harder to find games that don't work with widescreen mode than to find ones that do. Widescreen itself doesn't really affect the performance of games, which is really good if you want to enjoy basic PS2 gaming on your big ass screen. But I'm sure many of you didn't buy a huge monitor or TV to play games on 480p. I'd say the emulator really shines when you up the resolution. Currently, the emulator supports upscaling up to 8 times native res, which is way more than these games need. And even though 8x is possible, it's not really ideal for a lot of games. If you choose to upscale games to the highest setting, expect frames to drop significantly. Need for Speed looked great, but turned to a slow and choppy mess at 8x, and Shadow of the Colossus almost made me cry. Fear not, because a lot of the games still looked great and were very smooth at 4K, 1440, and 1080i/p, which I think is still quite respectable. You'll have to play around with the resolution to what looks and feels good. Sometimes you might even be pleasantly surprised. Sly Cooper ran amazingly at 8x, no noticeable lag or frame rate drops. A real ugly duckling to Swan story thanks to Aether. And finally, GTA San Andreas held together quite well at 8x, which gave me quite a shock because, well, it's GTA San Andreas. That game is huge. There is still a slight doubling effect whenever cutscenes took place indoors, and a few frames dropped below its standard 30 at certain times and places. But for the most part, enjoy a high-res adventure with CJ and the crew. However, upping the resolution might not be enough for the overall picture on some games. There are very minor visual errors you might have noticed, specifically shadow and shine textures. I briefly covered a quick fix when you switch over to the emulator's software renderer. Let's delve a bit deeper into that, cover exactly what it does, its limitations, and what we can expect from it. By default, AetherSX2 uses the graphics hardware of the console to render visual elements of the games. Well, some PS2 games are just built different, I guess, because some visual elements clearly aren't displayed properly using the GPU. Enter the software renderer.
Yeah, boy!
Switching over to this mode essentially means switching the main graphics rendering component over to the CPU. And it's kind of impressive how it's able to do that. No restarts required. You can basically just put software mode on and go completely back to your game. Given the strength of the Xbox Series CPU, it wasn't anything the console couldn't handle. But the results, I have mixed feelings about. On one hand, this fixes issues found in games like the shadows in Jak and Daxter and Metal Gear 3. The shine in Gran Turismo 4 and the whole game of The Godfather. That, however, comes at the cost of picture quality and in some cases, game performance. To my knowledge, I was unable to upscale the resolution of any games on software mode, leaving it playable at native PS2 quality, which would be fine if there were zero performance issues. Software mode made Jak and Daxter's frame rate drop in places where it ran very smoothly in hardware mode, even at 4K. Gran Turismo 4 was good for the most part, but there is some noticeable lag on some of the tracks, specifically the night mode tracks. However, GT4 is an interesting case, as I only just discovered that the issue only occurs in Direct3D 12. Switching over to 3D11 fixes this tiny issue and allows you to up resolution to your heart's desire. I will warn that going 4K or beyond in GT4 may cause AetherSX2 to crash, especially in the night tracks. Those are a real bitch. These games, however, can all be run optionally in software mode, if you desire. Some games, I'd say, are mandatory. The Godfather can be played in hardware mode if you can tolerate whatever the hell's happening here. Running it in software mode may make it look a bit primitive, but it is a very smooth experience at the end of the day. And The Sims 2, maybe a game that nobody cares about but me, is playable in hardware mode, but some of the menu icons don't get displayed. And in the actual game, you can see the seams of where certain textures are connected. Overall, the game's quite ugly. Software makes the game look better with very minor stutters every now and then, but I played this game quite heavily on the PS2 back in the day, and that's just how I remember the game being. It's pretty cool that you get more options to play your games and overall just make some games playable and preserved. Do you want your games to look as good as possible by upping the res while ignoring some graphical blemishes? Or do you want accurate PS2 emulation with no visual errors but small performance hits? Choice is yours, and whatever you pick, it'll be a good experience. Now you might be wondering about RetroArch. Does it have a software mode? And if it does, maybe Aether doesn't blow it completely out of the water. Well, no. The only rendering option you can choose from apart from DirectX for PS2 emulation is OpenGL. From my understanding, another type of graphics processor using the GPU. And if you switch over to OpenGL, you just can't play PS2 anymore, or at least I couldn't. After switching to OpenGL, doing a whole RetroArch restart, I encountered an error with PS2 games that wouldn't allow me to launch any content. So PS2 emulation on RetroArch for me is broken until I reinstall it. I've tried my best to repair it, but reinstallation, specifically for the PS2 core, might be my best option. And with that final nail in the coffin, it's clear which PS2 emulator reigns supreme on the Xbox. Wait, hold on. Boy, that'd be a great final line to transition into the conclusion. But I completely forgot about two other things Aether does really well that it couldn't quite fit in earlier and naturally. So that's why I'm ham-fisting a plugin here. Multiplayer is almost fully functional on Aether. Adding in another controller isn't hard, but I had an embarrassingly tough time figuring out how exactly to do that. Essentially, have the second controller switch themselves on in the settings and map the controller inputs to the correct controller number. It's 1, I don't know why I just didn't say it, this video's falling apart. After that, you're good to go. Co-op and multiplayer is fine and fun. Second controller functions just as good as the first in all applicable games, they just can't access the emulator menu. I tried testing the multi-tap feature and it's either not fully functional or I just sucked at setting it up. Whatever the reason, I don't care. I don't plan on having a PS2 couch party anytime soon anyway. If it's not fully implemented yet, then it might be just around the corner. 4-player games can certainly detect other controllers. If it is ready on the Xbox, then I'm just an idiot. What is fully functional and quite excellent is the auto BIOS detection feature. Aether, just like DuckStation, has a pretty cool auto feature to detect which BIOS to use in the case of region-specific games, like Japanese exclusives. Meaning you don't have to manually switch the BIOS over to the correct region. You just pick the game in your list and the program takes care of it for you, as long as you have the correct BIOS in your directory. It's a neat feature that allows you to add even more games onto your console library, with no hassle added to actually play them. Okay, now we're done. Now we can end the video. Hit it, St. Pepsi! At this point, I don't think it's very hard to tell how I feel about this program. I love AetherSX2 and think it's phenomenal on the Xbox. It's a great way to play PS2 classics if you like the platforms or hardware. The quality and performance you get on a Microsoft machine for a huge list of PS2 games is superb. Sure, it's not perfect, but it's still technically in alpha. Whether you use AetherSX2 in dev mode or on retail, you can be sure the Xbox can deliver playable PS2 games that you desire for essentially no cost. And if one particular game or feature doesn't work now, chances are there's an update around the corner to add onto the already incredible emulator or fix the minor issues it currently has. The work on emulators is never truly done, and I look forward to what the Aether folks can do in the future, considering they've already provided a damn good alpha. I wholeheartedly recommend downloading Aether on your Series S or X if you're a fan of PS2 games, especially if you grew up with a PlayStation 2 like I did and want to relive your childhood. and maybe share that with your friends and family on a couch as intended. The Xbox allows you to do that with ease. These are powerful machines for the price, and their backwards compatibility capabilities keep expanding thanks to the emulation community. You know, it wasn't too long ago when I once said, I long for the day I can say I can play PS2 games on my Xbox. And I think I've done my best to show you all that day has come.